A homeless veteran and his dog inherited a $900 bunker. What they found was beyond money. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's incredible journey. It was a cold and dreary winter morning in a small, forgotten corner of the world. The kind of place where the roads never saw much traffic, and the houses, weathered by years of neglect, seemed to fade into the background of a town that no longer cared. But this was where a man, down on his luck, found himself standing in front of a rundown auction house, clutching his last remaining dollars. His name was Jackson Miller, a homeless veteran who had spent the past few years drifting from place to place with nothing but the loyal companionship of his dog. Max Jackson had been to war, seen things no one should ever have to see, and in return, the world had left him behind. Now, here he was, about to make one of the strangest purchases of his life, a rusty old bunker for $900. Jackson didn't have much choice. The town didn't offer many opportunities for someone like him, and the desperation in his heart pushed him to take this gamble. Maybe, just maybe, this bunker would give him a place to rest his head for a while. Little did he know, it would become the start of a journey that would change everything. The bunker sat there, forgotten by time, in a corner of the auction house with no one else bidding on it. To most people, it was just a pile of scrap metal. But for Jackson, it was a chance, a slim chance, perhaps, but a chance nonetheless. He had no idea what was inside. It was just a cold, dark structure that might give him some shelter from the harsh weather. As he stood there, the bid ended. He was the only one left, and the bunker was his for the price of a few $100s. The auctioneer gave him a nod, and Jackson, with Max by his side, made his way to the back of the building to load up his strange new acquisition. The drive back to his temporary shelter was quiet. Max sat beside him in the truck, his ears perked, his eyes scanning the road ahead. Jackson couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. The bunker wasn't much to look at, but there was something about it that felt important. Maybe it was just wishful thinking, or maybe it was the weight of his past pushing him to search for something, anything, that could offer him a fresh start. When Jackson finally arrived at his makeshift home, he parked the truck and stared at the bunker in the back. The wind howled through the empty street, and Max let out a soft whine. "What do you think, boy?" Jackson said quietly, looking down at his dog. Max's tail gave a small wag. Jackson chuckled, though it didn't mask the feeling of uncertainty gnawing at him. He unloaded the bunker and set it down near his shelter. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at it. What was he doing? It seemed absurd. He'd spent $900 on something that was, in all honesty, just a big metal box. But then, something strange happened. As the wind picked up again, Jackson noticed a faint vibration coming from the bunker. It was so subtle at first that he thought it was just the wind, but then Max barked sharply, his attention fixed on the structure. Jackson's heart skipped a beat. What was going on? As he reached out to touch the side of the bunker, he felt it again, a soft, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat coming from deep within. The sensation was enough to make his skin prickle. Max's growls grew louder, more insistent. The dog was sensing something, too. Jackson took a deep breath. Whatever this bunker was, it was no ordinary piece of junk. He didn't know what was hidden inside, but he felt an undeniable pull to find out. And so, with Max by his side, he set about exploring the strange and mysterious bunker, unaware of the life-changing secrets it was about to reveal. As Jackson stood next to the bunker, Max's ears were still alert, his eyes fixed on the metal structure that seemed to hum with life. Jackson's mind raced. What could possibly be inside this old, rusted thing? His curiosity was overpowering, but so was his sense of caution. He had been through enough to know that nothing was ever as it seemed. But this was different. Something about the pulse he felt earlier wouldn't leave his thoughts. He set down his tools and moved closer to the bunker. The rhythmic vibration was unmistakable now. It wasn't just the wind or his imagination. There was something hidden within, something alive. Jackson took a deep breath, glancing at Max before he carefully placed his hand on the cold metal surface. The moment he touched it, The vibration intensified, and a soft, mechanical click echoed from inside. Jackson jumped back in surprise, but Max was already on alert, his body tense as if he knew something was about to happen. The door of the bunker slowly creaked open, revealing a dark interior. Jackson hesitated for a moment. The thought of entering a dark, possibly dangerous space filled him with unease, but his instincts told him this was important. With Max close behind him, Jackson stepped inside. The air was musty and thick with the scent of old earth and metal. As he adjusted his eyes to the darkness, he saw something that made his breath catch in his throat, a faint light flickering in the far corner of the room. He moved cautiously toward it, his steps echoing in the empty space. The light was coming from an old lamp, attached to a wooden table. On the table, there were several objects scattered haphazardly: a worn leather journal, a few dusty books, and a strange, intricately carved box that seemed to be calling to him. He reached for the box first, his fingers brushing the surface. The carvings were intricate, almost otherworldly, as if the box had been made long before his time. It was heavier than it looked, and as he picked it up, he felt a strange weight in his chest. This was no ordinary box. Max barked, drawing Jackson's attention to the far wall. There, half hidden behind a pile of old crates, was something else. A wooden chest, locked and covered in layers of dust. The chest was old, probably as old as the bunker itself, and something about it seemed to draw Jackson's gaze. He slowly made his way over to it, the anticipation growing. With each step, reaching the chest, Jackson noticed that the lock was different from anything he had seen before. It was old-fashioned, yet intricately designed, like it had been made by someone who knew what they were doing. He ran his fingers over the lock, trying to figure out how to open it. After a few moments, he found a hidden mechanism and twisted it. The chest creaked open. Inside, there was something that made Jackson's heart skip a beat. Piles of old photographs, maps, and several documents sealed in a thick, waxy envelope. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as he pulled out the envelope. It was marked with a symbol he had seen before, years ago, during his time in the military. It was a symbol associated with a secret government operation, one that had been classified and erased from official records. His hands trembled as he carefully broke the seal. The papers inside were yellowed with age, but the writing was clear. Jackson scanned the first page, and his eyes widened. The documents detailed an operation that had taken place decades ago, one that involved a secret bunker like the one he had just opened. The operation had been abandoned, and the records erased, but the documents revealed a shocking truth. This bunker was part of a larger, hidden network of underground locations that had been used to store highly classified materials. As Jackson read further, the truth sank in. This bunker wasn't just a forgotten relic. It was a key to something much larger, something that had been hidden for years. His mind raced as he pieced together the details. This was no ordinary bunker. It was a part of a secret legacy, a legacy that Jackson was now a part of. Max barked again, this time with more urgency. Jackson snapped out of his thoughts and looked at his dog. Max was staring at something on the ground. Jackson followed his gaze and froze. There, on the floor, was a small metallic object, shiny and new, as if it had been placed there just moments before. It was a key. Not just any key, but a key that seemed to fit the strange lock on the box he had found earlier. Jackson's heart raced. He had stumbled onto something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. What was the key for? And more importantly, why had it been left here, in this forgotten bunker, for him to find? With a sense of urgency, Jackson picked up the key and walked back to the box. Max followed closely behind, his ears perked, his body tense. Jackson inserted the key into the box's lock. It clicked open with a smooth, almost deliberate motion. Inside, he found a series of photographs and documents that detailed the next steps of the operation. It was clear now that this was the beginning of a journey he couldn't turn back from. As he examined the contents, he realized that the bunker was not just a place of hiding. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would change everything for him, for Max, and for anyone else who had been touched by this hidden legacy. The truth was out there, and Jackson was about to uncover it. Jackson stared at the contents of the box, his mind racing. The photographs and documents he had uncovered seemed to paint a picture of something much larger than a simple abandoned government operation. It was clear now that this bunker was not just a place of refuge, but the first piece in a much larger puzzle. The more Jackson read, the more his heart pounded in his chest. The documents detailed secret meetings, covert operations, and an underground network of bunkers hidden across the country. Each one was connected. Each one held a piece of a hidden truth, one that could change the course of history. As Jackson turned the pages, the significance of what he had stumbled upon became clearer. This wasn't just about finding shelter. It was about unlocking the past and exposing secrets that had been buried for decades. He knew now that he couldn't simply walk away. This was his chance to make sense of the chaos of his life, a chance to uncover answers to questions he hadn't even known he had. Max, still close by, barked sharply, pulling Jackson out of his thoughts. The dog was restless, pacing back and forth, his gaze fixed on the far wall of the bunker. Jackson stood up, his eyes following Max's line of sight. There, tucked in the corner, was an old, wooden chest. It was much smaller than the previous one, but something about it seemed familiar, almost as if it were calling to him. Jackson walked over to the chest, his steps slow, deliberate. He kneeled down and ran his hand over its surface. The wood was worn, scratched by years of neglect, but it was sturdy, solid. The lock was strange, unlike anything Jackson had seen before. It was a complicated mechanism, one that seemed to have been designed specifically for this chest. He pulled out the small key he had found earlier and inserted it into the lock. It clicked open with a satisfying sound, and Jackson's pulse quickened. As he opened the chest, he was met with more documents, photographs, and another strange object. This time, it was a small, metallic cylinder. It was smooth, cold to the touch, and engraved with the same symbol he had seen on the previous documents. Jackson's mind raced again. What was this? What did it all mean? He carefully set the cylinder aside and sifted through the papers. The documents in this chest were even more detailed than the ones before. They outlined the specific locations of other bunkers, and some of them even had names attached to them, names that were unfamiliar but important. They mentioned coordinates, secretive meetings, and individuals who were still active in this underground network. Jackson's heart sank as he realized the scale of what he had uncovered. This wasn't just some old relic. It was an ongoing operation, one that had been hidden from the world for decades. But why? Why had it been kept secret for so long? And what was Jackson's role in all of this? As he sat there, poring over the documents, the weight of the discovery began to settle on him. He wasn't just a homeless veteran who had stumbled upon a forgotten bunker. He had become part of something much larger, a network of secrets and lies that had been kept hidden from the world. But with this knowledge came a sense of responsibility. Jackson knew he couldn't just walk away from this. He had to learn more, to uncover the truth behind the operation and the people involved. But where would he even begin? The key, the cylinder, the photographs, they were all pieces of a much larger puzzle, and Jackson wasn't sure how to put it all together. But he knew one thing for certain. His life had changed forever. As he looked at Max, who was now sitting beside him, watching him intently, Jackson realized that this wasn't just a journey to uncover hidden secrets. It was a journey to find himself. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose, something he hadn't felt since before the war. This mission, this mystery, had the power to give him the answers he had been searching for. But it would also test him in ways he could never have imagined. Jackson stood up, taking a deep breath as he looked around the dark bunker. There was no turning back now. He was in this for the long haul, and he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Max barked softly, as if in agreement, and Jackson smiled. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Jackson spent the next several days in the bunker, poring over the documents he had uncovered. The more he read, the deeper he sank into a web of intrigue and mystery. Each page seemed to open a new door, revealing even more about the hidden world he had accidentally stumbled into. But the more he learned, the more questions arose. The bunker was not just a forgotten relic. It was a vital part of an ongoing network. A network of individuals, some still active, who had been involved in covert operations for decades. This was not just about secrets from the past. It was about something much bigger. Jackson sat at the table, his eyes scanning the photos and maps laid out in front of him. There were coordinates for other bunkers, some located in remote areas, others in more accessible regions. It was clear now that the government had been hiding these places for a reason. But why? Why had they been abandoned? And why had they kept these locations a secret for so long? Max, as always, was by his side, his fur now matted from days of wandering in and out of the bunker. The dog had become more than just a companion. He had become Jackson's anchor in the midst of all the chaos. Whenever Jackson felt himself becoming overwhelmed, Max would nudge him, grounding him in the present, reminding him that he wasn't alone. But despite Max's calming presence, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on him. The further he went down this rabbit hole, the more dangerous it seemed. It wasn't just the discovery of the bunkers that concerned him. It was what they were hiding. Jackson knew that there were people out there who would stop at nothing to protect these secrets. He could feel their eyes on him, even though he couldn't see them. They were out there, watching, waiting. One afternoon, while Jackson was sifting through a set of coordinates, he heard a noise outside the bunker. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind, but it grew louder with each passing second. Jackson stood up, his heart racing. He motioned for Max to stay close, and the dog's ears perked up as he, too, sensed the shift in the air. The noise was getting closer, and Jackson knew he had to act fast. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing through. They were searching. Jackson grabbed the metallic cylinder he had found earlier and shoved it into his backpack. He gathered the documents he had been studying, folding them carefully before tucking them away. It was a small gesture, but it made him feel like he had some control over the situation, like he wasn't completely at the mercy of whatever was about to happen. He moved quietly to the entrance of the bunker, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the landscape outside. Through the cracks in the door, he could see shadows moving just beyond the tree line. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. The figures were too far away to identify, but their movements were deliberate, too precise to be ordinary people. They were professionals. Jackson's instincts kicked into overdrive. He had been trained to survive in situations like this, to stay hidden when necessary, to adapt quickly. But this was different. The stakes were higher now. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about uncovering the truth. Jackson held his breath as the figures grew closer. He could hear them talking now, their voices low and indistinct, but they were clearly searching for something. Or someone. Max growled low in his throat, sensing the danger. Jackson placed a hand on the dog's head, silencing him. He needed to stay calm. He couldn't afford to make a noise, not yet. He watched the figures carefully, his mind racing as he tried to decide what to do next. They were only a few feet away when one of them stopped, their head tilting as if they had sensed something. Jackson froze. It felt as though time had slowed to a crawl. The figure turned slightly, scanning the area with an intensity that made Jackson's blood run cold. The man was looking right in his direction. For a moment, Jackson's heart stopped. Had he been seen? But then, the man turned away, and the group continued walking, oblivious to Jackson's presence. Jackson exhaled slowly, his body relaxing. It had been a close call, but he knew that luck wouldn't always be on his side. He needed to move. Now, without wasting another second, Jackson grabbed his backpack and gestured for Max to follow. The two of them moved quickly, slipping out the back of the bunker and into the dense woods behind it. They had to keep moving, to get as far away from the bunker as possible. But Jackson knew deep down that it wouldn't be enough. The people who had been searching for him would be back. They always came back. And when they did, Jackson would be ready. The world he had known was changing. He wasn't just a homeless veteran anymore. He was a man with a purpose, a man who had uncovered a hidden truth that was bigger than anything he could have imagined. And no matter what happened next, he was determined to see it through to the end. Jackson and Max had been on the run for several days now, traveling deeper into the woods. Every rustle of the leaves, every creak of a distant branch made Jackson jump. He couldn't shake the feeling that the men who had been searching for him were still out there, following his every move. The bunker, the documents, the strange symbols, they were all connected, and Jackson knew that he couldn't let them fall into the wrong hands. Not after what he had uncovered. The night air was cold as they camped under the canopy of towering trees. Jackson sat next to a small fire, trying to keep warm. Max curled up beside him, his eyes scanning the darkness. Jackson ran his fingers through his beard, lost in thought. He kept going over everything he had learned. The bunkers, the operation, the legacy that had been passed down for decades. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. This was bigger than just him. It was bigger than the government or any one person. There were forces at play here, forces that would stop at nothing to protect the secrets of these bunkers. Jackson wasn't sure what the next step was, but he knew that he had to find more answers. And he had to do it fast. His mind raced as he thought about the coordinates he had seen in the documents. He had a few leads, a few places to check, but he had no idea where to start. The first bunker had led him to the truth, but there had to be more out there. Maybe some of the other bunkers still held valuable information. Or maybe they had something even more important hidden inside them. He looked at Max, who was still alert, his ears twitching. The dog had been his constant companion throughout this journey, and Jackson knew that Max was just as determined to find answers as he was. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the answers they were seeking were dangerous. The people who had set up this network of bunkers weren't just ordinary citizens. They were powerful, influential individuals who had the resources to hide their secrets for decades. Jackson had already seen how far they were willing to go to protect what they had buried, and he knew that they wouldn't stop coming after him until they had recovered everything he had found. The next morning, Jackson set out with Max by his side. They followed the map, heading toward the first set of coordinates. The landscape gradually changed as they moved away from the dense forest and into more open terrain. They crossed rivers, climbed hills, and navigated through overgrown fields. Jackson's muscles ached with exhaustion, but he pushed through. He couldn't afford to slow down. They had to get to the next bunker before anyone else did. As the sun began to set, they arrived at the coordinates. What they found was a small, seemingly inconspicuous building, hidden away at the edge of a cliff. It was made of stone and overgrown with ivy, barely noticeable against the backdrop of the trees. Jackson's heart raced as he approached the building. He had no idea what he was about to find, but he felt it in his gut. This place held something important. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, Max following closely behind. The air was musty and stale, and the faint smell of earth lingered in the corners. Jackson's flashlight beam cut through the darkness as he scanned the room. The space was small, filled with crates and boxes that had been stacked haphazardly. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. Jackson moved cautiously through the room, his eyes flicking from one box to the next. Then, he noticed something out of place. A small metal door, hidden behind a pile of old crates. It was covered in rust and looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. But something about it called to him, and he couldn't resist the urge to investigate. He moved the crates aside and approached the door. It was locked, but the lock was old and brittle. With a few firm tugs, Jackson was able to break it open. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into the darkness. Jackson felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. What could be waiting for him down there? He glanced at Max, who seemed just as eager to explore. Together, they descended into the underground space. The air grew colder as they went deeper. The walls were lined with shelves, some filled with old papers and files, others with strange objects Jackson couldn't even begin to identify. He moved carefully, stepping over piles of dust and debris. As they ventured further into the underground chamber, they came across a small table with an old, worn book lying on it. Jackson's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was what he had been searching for. He reached for the book, his hands trembling as he picked it up. It was thick, bound in leather, and covered in strange markings. He opened it carefully, flipping through the pages. The book was filled with notes, sketches, and diagrams, much like the documents he had found earlier. But this was different. This book seemed to contain the most detailed information yet. It outlined the history of the bunkers, the purpose they served, and the people behind them. The deeper Jackson read, the more he realized how much he didn't know. This was a map to something far more powerful, something that had the potential to reshape everything he thought he knew about the world. But he wasn't the only one searching for it. Jackson's time was running out. He had to uncover the rest of the secrets before it was too late. Jackson carefully closed the book, the weight of its contents pressing heavily on his mind. The further he read, the deeper he understood the true scope of what he had stumbled upon. This wasn't just a series of old, forgotten bunkers. It was a vast, underground network of safe houses, hidden from the world for a reason. The more he thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place. The bunker he had discovered was just the beginning, but the book revealed that it was connected to something far more elaborate, something that had the potential to change everything. As Jackson flipped through the pages, he found mention of the Nexus, an elusive, secret organization that had been pulling the strings behind these operations for decades. The documents were filled with encrypted messages and cryptic diagrams, but they all pointed toward one thing. The Nexus was still active, and they would stop at nothing to ensure that their secrets stayed hidden. Jackson's heart raced as he processed the information. He wasn't just involved in uncovering a forgotten past. He was now a part of something much bigger, something dangerous. He glanced at Max, who was sitting nearby, his ears perked as if sensing his unease. The dog was always in tune with Jackson's emotions, and right now, Max seemed as tense as he felt. Jackson stood up, pacing back and forth in the small, underground room. The book was a treasure trove of knowledge, but it was also a dangerous burden. Whoever the Nexus was, they had clearly been watching the bunkers for a long time. They knew what Jackson had uncovered, and they weren't going to let him just walk away with their secrets. Jackson's first instinct was to run, to leave everything behind and vanish into the wilderness with Max, but he knew that wasn't an option. He had to finish what he started. He had to learn the truth, no matter the cost. The truth was buried deep, and Jackson had to find it before the Nexus did. With a deep breath, he turned back to the table and began to gather the documents. There was more to uncover, more bunkers to explore, and more hidden truths to expose. But first, Jackson knew he had to be careful. The next move had to be calculated. He couldn't risk exposing himself just yet. The network was vast, and the Nexus was too powerful to take lightly. He had no idea how far they would go to protect their secrets, but he was determined to find out. The next few days passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Jackson and Max moved quickly, traveling from one remote location to the next, always keeping a low profile. They knew they couldn't afford to stay in one place too long. The Nexus was relentless, and they would stop at nothing to catch up with him. As they made their way to the next set of coordinates, Jackson's mind raced with questions. What was the Nexus really after? What did they want with the bunkers? And why had they been keeping their existence a secret for so long? The answers were out there, and Jackson was determined to find them. The journey wasn't easy. The terrain grew more treacherous as they moved deeper into uncharted wilderness, but Jackson pressed on. Max was by his side every step of the way, always alert, always ready to protect him. They had become a team, two lost souls searching for answers in a world that had turned its back on them. But as they approached the next location on the map, Jackson felt a growing sense of unease. Something didn't feel right. The air was thick with tension, and the woods seemed unnaturally quiet. Max growled softly, his body tense, as they neared an old cabin hidden deep in the forest. It was exactly where the coordinates had led them, but Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. He reached for the small gun he kept in his pack, feeling the cold metal against his fingers. He wasn't sure what awaited him inside the cabin, but he wasn't taking any chances. With a steady hand, Jackson pushed open the creaky door, Max at his side. The cabin was dark, and the air inside was stale, but as Jackson's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A set of old, worn-out chairs sat around a table, but it wasn't the furniture that caught his attention. It was the figure standing by the window, a man, his face hidden in shadow, watching them. Jackson's heart skipped a beat. The man didn't move, didn't say a word. But Jackson knew instantly that he wasn't alone. The Nexus had found him, and now he was trapped. Jackson stood frozen, his heart racing as he stared at the figure by the window. The man's face was obscured by shadow, but Jackson could feel the weight of his presence, a silent threat that filled the small, dimly lit cabin. Max, sensing the tension, growled low in his throat, his fur bristling. Jackson's hand instinctively reached for the small gun tucked into his waistband, his fingers tightening around the handle. The air in the cabin was thick with uncertainty. The man didn't speak, didn't make any move to approach them. He simply stood there, watching. The silence stretched on, an unnerving stillness that seemed to hang in the air, waiting for something to break it. Jackson's mind raced. Was this someone from the Nexus? A member of the group that had been tracking him? Or was it someone else entirely? Someone who had stumbled upon this place, just like he had? Jackson couldn't take any chances. He stepped forward slowly, his eyes never leaving the figure by the window. Max moved beside him, his ears perked and ready to react at a moment's notice. "Who are you?" Jackson's voice was low, steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. For a long moment, there was no response. The man just continued to stand there, his hands clasped behind his back. Jackson felt a bead of sweat trickle down his neck, but he didn't move. "I'm not here to hurt you," the man finally said, his voice calm, almost soothing. "But you're in danger." Jackson's grip on the gun tightened. He wasn't sure if he should trust the man or not. He had learned the hard way that trusting people could get you killed. But there was something about the man's presence, the way he carried himself, that made Jackson hesitate. "What do you mean I'm in danger?" Jackson demanded. The man stepped into the light, and for the first time, Jackson got a good look at him. He was older than Jackson, maybe in his late 40s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore a weathered jacket and had the look of someone who had seen a lot in his life. "You're digging into something that you don't fully understand," the man replied, his tone serious. "The Nexus isn't something you can just walk away from. Once they know you're involved, they don't let you go." Jackson's mind was spinning. The Nexus again. He had heard enough to know that these people were dangerous, but he didn't fully understand what they were or what they wanted. All he knew was that they were powerful, and now they were coming after him. "Who are you?" Jackson asked, his voice sharper now. "Why are you helping me?" The man paused, then let out a long sigh. "I'm someone who's been fighting the Nexus for a long time," he said quietly. "And I know what they're capable of. I've seen it firsthand." Jackson's pulse quickened. Could this man be trusted? "So, what? You're here to save me?" Jackson asked, still wary. "I'm here to help you survive," the man replied. "Because if you don't, they'll find you, and they'll kill you. The Nexus doesn't make mistakes. They don't forgive." Jackson's mind was a whirlwind. He had come this far, and now he was being told that it was all bigger than he had imagined. That the Nexus was more powerful, more dangerous than he had realized. "How do you know all of this?" Jackson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the table, picking up a small, folded map. He handed it to Jackson. "This is a map to the next bunker," the man said. "It's where you need to go next. But you won't be able to get there alone." Jackson looked at the map, then back at the man. "Why are you helping me?" he asked again, his voice growing more insistent. "Because you're the key," the man said, his gaze intense. "You're the one who can stop this. But only if you get to the next bunker before they do." Jackson stared at him, confused. "Stop what? What are you talking about?" The man sighed again, his eyes darkening. "The Nexus has been operating for years. They've been building something, a weapon, a machine, something that could change the world. And they've been using these bunkers to hide the pieces. But you..." He paused, looking directly into Jackson's eyes. "You're the one who can stop them. If you can get to the next bunker, you'll find what you need to destroy it." Jackson felt a surge of both fear and determination. This was it. The stakes had never been higher. He had been pulled into a game that was much bigger than he ever imagined. But now he was being told that he was the key to stopping it all. "I don't know if I can do this," Jackson said quietly. "I'm not the person you think I am." The man looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "You're more than you think. You just have to believe it." Jackson didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to run, to forget everything he had learned. But another part of him knew that running was no longer an option. He had uncovered too much. The truth was out there, and now, he had to finish what he had started. The man turned to leave, then paused. "I'll be in touch," he said. "But be careful. The Nexus is already looking for you, and they'll stop at nothing to find you." With that, the man walked out of the cabin, leaving Jackson alone with the map, the weight of the task ahead, and Max, who was still by his side, loyal as ever. Jackson stood there for a moment, staring at the map. The journey was far from over. And this time, the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. Jackson stood there, staring at the map the mysterious man had left behind. The weight of the decision ahead of him was heavy, but there was no turning back now. He had been thrust into a world of secrets and lies, and the deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. The Nexus was no longer just a shadowy group. It was a force that had been lurking in the dark for years, pulling the strings behind the scenes. And Jackson, for reasons he didn't fully understand, had become the key to stopping them. The man's words echoed in his mind. "You're the one who can stop them." It sounded impossible. Jackson had never considered himself a hero. never thought he was capable of taking down a massive organization like the Nexus. But now, with everything he had uncovered, he knew that he couldn't just walk away. He had no choice but to press forward, to find the next bunker and uncover whatever lay hidden there. He couldn't do it alone, though. Max, his loyal German shepherd, had been his constant companion through everything. Without him, Jackson wasn't sure he would have made it this far. The dog had been more than a source of comfort. He was Jackson's eyes, his ears, his protector. Together, they had made it through some of the hardest times in Jackson's life. And now, they had to face something even more dangerous. Jackson packed up his gear, stuffing the map into his jacket. He knew time was running out. The Nexus was close behind, and they wouldn't stop until they found him. He had to move fast. The coordinates on the map led him to a remote part of the country, deep into the mountains. It wasn't a place many people would think to look, but it was exactly the kind of place Jackson needed to be. The further he went from civilization, the safer he would be, at least for now. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every time he looked over his shoulder, the trees seemed to shift in ways that weren't natural, as though someone or something was lurking just out of sight. But he couldn't afford to dwell on that. He had a mission now, and the longer he stayed in one place, the more likely it was that the Nexus would catch up with him. The journey to the coordinates was long and treacherous. Jackson and Max climbed steep hills, crossed freezing streams, and fought through thick underbrush. The higher they went, the colder it became, and the more isolated they felt. But there was no turning back. The bunker, or whatever lay hidden there, was too important. The map led them to an old, weathered cabin at the base of a rocky cliff. It was abandoned, the windows boarded up, and the door hanging off its hinges. But Jackson knew this was the place. He could feel it in his bones. He approached cautiously, his senses on high alert. Max growled low, his ears flat against his head. Jackson motioned for him to stay close, and the dog obeyed, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. The cabin was eerily silent as they stepped inside. The air was stale, and the scent of mildew filled Jackson's nostrils. It was clear that no one had been here for years, but the sense of something hidden, something valuable, lingered. Jackson's flashlight flickered as he moved through the dark space, the beam cutting through the thick dust in the air. There were crates stacked in the corners, some of them sealed shut, others partially open. The floor creaked underfoot, and Jackson could feel the weight of every step. He walked slowly, carefully, knowing that every corner could hide a secret. As he moved to the back of the cabin, something caught his eye. A trapdoor, almost hidden beneath a pile of old boards and crates. Jackson's heart skipped a beat. This had to be it. The next piece of the puzzle. He cleared away the debris, revealing the handle. It was rusted, but still intact. Jackson gripped it tightly and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a set of stairs leading down into the darkness below. The air that wafted up from the stairs was cold, damp, and musty. Without hesitation, Jackson descended, Max close behind. The stairs were narrow and steep, but they led down to a room that was unlike any other Jackson had seen before. It was vast, filled with old equipment, shelves of dusty boxes, and strange objects that Jackson couldn't begin to identify. But there, in the center of the room, was a large metal chest. It was old, the surface covered in layers of dust, but it was unmistakably important. Jackson's hands trembled as he approached it. He had no idea what was inside, but he knew it was the key to everything. He crouched down in front of the chest, examining the lock. It was intricate, covered in strange symbols, symbols that matched those in the documents he had found earlier. This was it, the final piece. Jackson pulled out the small key he had found at the first bunker. He inserted it into the lock. It clicked, and with a sharp exhale, he opened the chest. Inside, he found a stack of papers, all of them sealed with the same wax emblem, the emblem of the Nexus. His heart pounded as he reached for the papers. The truth was here, in his hands. And as he began to read, Jackson realized that the battle was only just beginning. Jackson sat on the cold, damp floor, the metal chest open before him. He had finally unlocked the secrets of the Nexus, or at least part of them. The papers inside were neatly stacked, each one sealed with a wax emblem. He could feel his heart racing as he reached for the first document, his fingers trembling. This was it. This was the moment that everything he had fought for, everything he had uncovered, came to a head. He unfolded the first sheet, his eyes scanning the words. The document was a detailed list of names, locations, and operations, all tied to various bunkers across the country. Jackson's mind raced as he read through the text, piecing together the larger picture. This wasn't just a network of underground safe houses. It was an intricate web of power, with the Nexus at its center. Each bunker contained more than just secrets. It was a key part of a larger plan, a plan that Jackson now realized could change the course of history. He flipped through the papers, his eyes catching details about a hidden project, something coded only as Project Dawn. The project seemed to be the culmination of years of planning, an operation so secret that even the highest levels of government had been kept in the dark. Jackson's pulse quickened as he read about the project's potential to alter global power dynamics. This was bigger than anything he had imagined. The stakes had just gotten much higher. As he continued reading, Jackson learned that the Nexus wasn't just a rogue organization. It was a shadow network that had infiltrated every level of government, military, and private sector. Their influence was vast, and they had been manipulating events for decades. The bunkers were just one piece of the puzzle, and Project Dawn was the final move. But the real kicker was that the Nexus had known about Jackson from the beginning. The documents mentioned his name, his military background, and his involvement in uncovering their secrets. They had been watching him. The realization hit Jackson like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just a man caught in a conspiracy. He was part of their plan. He had been the one to unwittingly set things in motion. He had stumbled upon their operation and, in doing so, had become the catalyst for everything they had been working towards. The thought was chilling. He had spent so long running, hiding, and trying to piece together the truth, but now he realized that the Nexus had always been one step ahead. They had planned for him to find these bunkers. They had anticipated every move he had made. Jackson stood up, the weight of the documents in his hands suddenly feeling heavier than ever. Max, who had been lying quietly by the door, raised his head at Jackson's movement, his sharp eyes alert. Jackson knew what he had to do next. He had to destroy the evidence. Every piece of information he had uncovered was now a target, a tool for the Nexus to complete their plan. Jackson couldn't let that happen. He wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. He was fighting to stop them. But the question was, how? He had no idea how to take down an organization this powerful, especially one that had been operating in the shadows for so long. Jackson thought about the small metallic cylinder he had found in the first bunker. It had been a key, a symbol of something important, something that connected the bunkers to each other. Could it hold the key to stopping the Nexus? He didn't know, but he couldn't waste time wondering. He had to act fast. Without hesitation, Jackson grabbed the cylinder and stuffed it into his backpack. The papers went next, crammed into a folder and sealed tight. He couldn't take the chance of leaving anything behind. Every detail mattered now. He needed to find a way to reach the heart of the Nexus and destroy their operation from the inside. Jackson moved quickly, gathering his things, aware that time was slipping away. The men who had been following him would be closing in soon, and he couldn't afford to be caught. He grabbed Max's leash and opened the door of the cabin. The cold mountain air hit him like a slap, but he didn't flinch. It was time to move on, to the next bunker, to the next piece of the puzzle. As Jackson and Max stepped into the wilderness, the sound of distant footsteps echoed in the quiet. The chase was on. The Nexus wouldn't stop, but neither would he. The hunt had become a battle for the future, and Jackson knew that he was the only one who could stop it. He didn't have all the answers, but he had one thing they didn't. He had the will to fight. And with Max by his side, Jackson was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. Jackson's legs were aching as he and Max pushed through. The dense underbrush, the cold mountain air biting at his skin. He had been on the move for hours, the weight of the metal cylinder pressing against his back, the map now tucked securely in his jacket. Every step he took felt heavier, like he was being pulled further into a web that he wasn't sure he could escape. But there was no turning back. The Nexus was closing in, and he had to act fast. Max was ahead of him, moving with quiet determination, his nose twitching as he navigated through the forest. The dog seemed to sense the urgency of the situation, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows. Jackson couldn't help but admire Max's instincts. The dog had been with him through thick and thin, and now, more than ever, he relied on his companion's sharp senses. They were a team, two souls connected by the same mission. Jackson had no idea how much longer they could keep running. The Nexus was relentless, and they knew he was close. The bunker had been the key to everything. The secrets, the plans, the network that stretched far beyond anything Jackson had ever imagined. But as much as he had learned, he was still no closer to understanding why the Nexus wanted to keep these secrets hidden. What was Project Dawn? What were they planning? And why was he so crucial to their plans? The answers were elusive, buried deep in the pages of the documents he had uncovered. Every new piece of information only raised more questions. Jackson's mind raced as he moved through the trees, the cool wind rustling the leaves above him. He knew the next bunker was close. The map had led him here, to the edge of the forest, where the ground began to slope upward toward the mountains. He paused for a moment, catching his breath, and scanned the area. There was something about this place that felt different. A strange sense of déjà vu washed over him, as if he had been here before, as if this was the moment everything would change. Max, as if sensing his hesitation, looked back at him, his tail stiff and his posture alert. Jackson followed his gaze, his heart skipping a beat as he saw something ahead. The outline of a building, partially obscured by the trees, just visible through the thick undergrowth. The bunker. It was more hidden than the others, carefully concealed, as though someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it remained undetected. Jackson's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment that could unravel everything. He crouched down, signaling for Max to stay close, and slowly made his way toward the structure. The closer he got, the more tense the air seemed. The world around him felt too quiet, too still. He was waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. As he approached the bunker, Jackson noticed something that made his stomach drop. Footprints. Fresh ones. Someone had been here recently. Jackson's breath caught in his throat as he realized that the Nexus might already be inside. He wasn't the first to find this place, but there was no time to waste. The door to the bunker was locked, but the lock was old and rusted, just like the others. Jackson pulled out the key he had found in the first bunker, the same one that had opened the metal chest. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he was walking straight into a trap, but the urgency inside him pushed him forward. The key slid into the lock with ease, and the door creaked open. The smell of stale air and earth hit him as he stepped inside, the darkness swallowing him whole. He flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness, revealing a small room filled with crates and old furniture. It looked like any other forgotten space, empty, neglected, and covered in dust. But there was something off about it, something Jackson couldn't place. His instincts told him that this bunker was different from the others. He moved cautiously, his hand resting on the gun tucked into his waistband. Max stayed close by his side, alert and ready for anything. As they made their way deeper into the bunker, Jackson's flashlight landed on a table in the center of the room. It was covered in papers, but not the kind of papers he had found before. These were newer, more recent, and they seemed to be reports. Jackson's breath quickened as he approached the table, his eyes scanning the documents. This was it. These were the answers he had been looking for. The papers were filled with names, dates, and coordinates that matched the locations of the other bunkers. But there was more. The documents contained plans, detailed blueprints for something Jackson couldn't fully understand. It was a machine, a weapon, something designed to give the Nexus ultimate power. Jackson's mind raced. This was the endgame. Project Dawn. The final piece of the puzzle. He had to destroy it. The weight of the documents in his hands felt heavier than ever as he realized that the fate of everything rested on him. But before he could process what to do next, he heard it. A sound from behind him. The unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Jackson spun around, his heart racing. He knew they had found him. The Nexus was here. Jackson froze, his heart pounding in his chest as the sound of the gun being cocked echoed in the dark bunker. Max's growl was low, a warning that sent a chill down Jackson's spine. He turned slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his waist, but the man standing in the doorway already had him in his sights. The stranger, dressed in a black tactical outfit, stood motionless, his eyes cold and calculating. The gun was steady in his grip, aimed directly at Jackson. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," the man said, his voice low and calm, but laced with an unmistakable authority. Jackson's pulse raced as he evaluated the situation. This was no ordinary thug. The man's posture, the precision of his movements, told Jackson everything he needed to know. This was someone trained, someone from the Nexus. He had been found. The final confrontation was here. Max barked sharply, but Jackson quickly gave him a command, keeping the dog close to his side. "What do you want?" Jackson asked, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline coursing through him. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, his eyes scanning the room. Jackson's eyes flicked to the papers on the table, the plans, the blueprints, evidence that could bring the Nexus to its knees. He had to protect them. He couldn't let the man take them. "You know too much," the stranger finally said, his voice almost bored. "That's a problem." Jackson's grip on his gun tightened. "I'm not going to let you take these," he said, his voice low and firm. The stranger's lips curled into a faint smile, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's not about taking them," he said. "You're already too deep in this. You've already seen too much. And now, you'll have to pay the price for your curiosity." Jackson's mind raced. He had no way out. He was cornered. But one thing had always been true. He never went down without a fight. "I won't let you get away with it," Jackson said, his voice tight with resolve. The man's smile disappeared, and for a brief moment, Jackson thought he saw something flicker in his eyes, a hint of respect. But the moment passed as quickly as it came. The stranger took another step forward, the barrel of his gun unwavering. Jackson took a slow breath. If this was going to end, he was going to make it count. His mind flashed back to his training, to the years spent in the military, to every fight, every survival instinct that had kept him alive. He wasn't going down like this. He had to act. In a split second, Jackson moved. He lunged toward the man, using the table as cover, knocking it over in the process. The man barely had time to react before Jackson grabbed his arm and twisted it, forcing the gun to the side. The two men struggled, locked in a deadly embrace, each trying to gain the upper hand. Jackson's breath came in short gasps as he fought for control. Max barked loudly, charging toward the stranger, but Jackson's focus was on the man's gun. He had to get it away from him. The stranger twisted, using his knee to push Jackson off balance. The gunshot echoed through the bunker. Jackson's body jerked as the bullet grazed his side, the pain sharp and immediate. He gritted his teeth, pushing through it, knowing he couldn't stop now. With a final surge of strength, Jackson managed to wrest the gun from the stranger's hand. He slammed it to the ground, pinning the man down with all his weight. The struggle lasted mere seconds, but it felt like hours. Jackson's heart was racing as he held the stranger down, his breaths ragged. The man glared up at him, his eyes burning with fury. "You think you've won?" The stranger spat, blood trickling from his lip. Jackson didn't answer. He couldn't afford to. He wasn't done yet. He had to end this. Slowly, cautiously, Jackson reached for the papers on the table. The documents were the key to everything. The proof, the blueprint, the information that could expose the Nexus and bring down their operation for good. As he scooped them up, he felt the weight of the responsibility settle on him. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was the man who had the power to destroy an empire, to take down a shadow organization that had ruled in silence for too long. The stranger struggled beneath him, but Jackson kept him pinned. "You're not walking out of here," Jackson said, his voice steady. "Not while I'm alive." The man's eyes flashed with hatred, but Jackson wasn't scared. He wasn't backing down. As the two of them stared each other down, Jackson realized something. The Nexus had underestimated him. They had thought he was just a homeless veteran, a man with no future, no power. But now, he was more dangerous than ever. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Jackson kept the stranger pinned down, his weight pressing the man into the floor as he held the gun firmly in his hand. The sound of Max's barking had faded into the background, the dog now silently watching the struggle unfold. The bunker was eerily quiet again, save for their heavy breathing and the distant hum of the wind outside. The stranger's eyes burned with rage, but Jackson's determination only grew stronger. This was it, the point of no return. Jackson had the upper hand, but he knew that it wouldn't last long. The man beneath him was a part of the Nexus, and if he got the chance, he would strike back with everything he had. Jackson had to make sure that didn't happen. He stared into the man's eyes, feeling the weight of the situation. The Nexus had been operating for decades, manipulating governments, orchestrating covert operations, and using their power to control everything from the shadows. Jackson had uncovered their plans, and now he was the one who could bring them to an end. The man beneath him sneered, his lip curled in contempt. You think you can stop us? You're just one man. You're nothing. Jackson's grip tightened on the gun. He had heard those words before. He had been told he was nothing, that he wouldn't survive the war, that he wouldn't make it out alive. But here he was, standing over the man who had tried to destroy him, ready to finish what he had started. You're wrong, Jackson said quietly. I'm not just one man, and I'm not afraid of you. The man laughed, the sound hollow and mocking. Afraid? No, you're just too stupid to know when to quit. Jackson's face hardened as he pushed harder, pinning the man down with even more force. He wasn't going to let this go any longer. The Nexus had been pulling the strings for too long. It was time for their reign to end. Tell me where the rest of the operation is, Jackson demanded. Tell me everything you know about Project Dawn. The man's expression shifted, but it wasn't fear that crossed his face. It was something much darker. You think you can stop it? You think you're the first to come after us, he spat. There's no stopping what's already in motion. You're too late. Jackson's stomach churned as the man's words sank in. He had been chasing shadows, uncovering secrets. But what if it was already too late? What if Project Dawn was already beyond his reach? But Jackson couldn't afford to doubt now. He had to keep going. He had to finish this. He raised the gun slightly, just enough to signal that he wasn't playing games. Where is it? Where is the main facility? The center of it all. The man's eyes flicked to the side, and for a brief moment, Jackson saw a flash of hesitation. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. You don't know what you're messing with, the man said, his voice lower now, almost defeated. Project Dawn is already in motion. It's too big for you to stop. Jackson's mind raced. What did the man mean by that? What was Project Dawn? How had he gotten so close to the truth, only to find himself out of time? The stranger was breathing heavily, clearly struggling beneath Jackson's weight. He was losing his strength, but Jackson couldn't afford to let up. He had to know what the Nexus was planning. He needed to understand what had been hidden for so long. Tell me where it is, Jackson repeated, his voice firm. Or I'll make you talk. The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Jackson thought he wasn't going to say anything. But then, the stranger's voice came, low and menacing. It's already in the sky, he muttered. Jackson's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, he demanded. The man smiled, a twisted grin. You're too late. Project Dawn is already airborne. You can't stop it now. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. Airborne. What could the Nexus be planning? And why had they chosen now to put their operation into motion? Jackson's mind raced as the weight of the situation settled in. He was no longer just fighting for survival. He was fighting to stop a catastrophe. Project Dawn was something far beyond what he had imagined. It was bigger, more dangerous, and it was happening now. The man's smile faded as he seemed to realize that Jackson was no longer listening. He had already moved on, his thoughts racing as he processed the information. Project Dawn had already begun. The plan was in motion, and Jackson had to figure out how to stop it before it was too late. He took a step back from the man, his eyes still focused on him. You're not going anywhere, Jackson said, the gun still raised. You're going to help me. Tell me where I can find the facility. The man chuckled, as though Jackson's words were nothing more than a passing joke. You still don't get it, do you? He sneered. There is no facility. It's already been deployed. You're too late. Jackson's hands clenched around the gun. He had no time to waste. This was no longer just about stopping the Nexus. It was about preventing something catastrophic from unfolding. He needed to act, and he needed to act fast. Jackson stood over the man, his heart pounding as the weight of the situation crashed down on him. The Nexus had already set Project Dawn into motion. He was running out of time, and every second felt like an eternity. The stranger, breathing heavily beneath him, smirked, clearly enjoying Jackson's desperation. But Jackson wasn't going to let fear control him. He couldn't. Not now. You're lying, Jackson said, his voice sharp. If Project Dawn was airborne, I would have heard about it. This is just a mind game. You're trying to throw me off track. The man's grin faltered for just a moment, but then he chuckled darkly. You really don't understand, do you? He sneered. It's already in the air. You'll never catch up. You're too late. Jackson's grip on his gun tightened. He had no idea what the stranger meant by airborne, but he couldn't let this man leave with the knowledge he was holding. Tell me everything, Jackson demanded again, his voice steady. Where is it? Where's Project Dawn? What's happening? The man laughed again, his eyes flashing with something like pity. You think you can stop it now? You think you have the power to undo everything we've done? The mockery in his voice only fueled Jackson's determination. He wasn't going to let the Nexus win. You won't get away with it, Jackson said, his tone cold. The man shifted beneath him, realizing that Jackson wasn't going to give up. Fine, he muttered. It's not one thing, it's many. Project Dawn is a network, a system. Jackson's mind raced as he processed the words. A system? What did that mean? The bunkers you've been finding, they're all connected. Each one houses part of the infrastructure. Pieces of the puzzle. The airstrike you think you're looking for, it's just a cover. What you're really up against is bigger than you can imagine. It's not just a weapon, it's control. We've embedded ourselves everywhere. It's already done. The pieces are in place. Jackson felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. What do you mean, control? The man's voice dropped to a whisper. The next phase is already being activated. Once all the pieces are in place, we'll have control over everything. Government, military, communication. You'll never be able to stop it. Jackson's mind was reeling, the weight of the revelation settling in. The Nexus wasn't just trying to create a weapon. They were trying to seize control of the entire world. They had planned this for years, using these bunkers as hidden bases for their operation. Jackson felt sick, but he couldn't afford to let that stop him. He had to fight. He had to stop this. Jackson stood up, his decision made. I won't let you win. The man looked up at him, his face now cold and serious. You can try, but it's already too late. You can't fight something that's already in the sky. Jackson stared down at the man, then turned toward the table where the papers were scattered. He grabbed the map, his eyes scanning it quickly. There had to be something he was missing, some way to stop this. He couldn't accept that it was too late. As he flipped through the documents, his fingers brushed against something else hidden underneath, a small device, shaped like a transmitter. It looked out of place, but it could be the key to everything. Jackson's mind raced as he realized what it was. The transmitter was the link, the connection between all the bunkers. It was how the system communicated, how it activated. He held the device in his hand, feeling its weight. It wasn't much, but it was enough. If he could destroy the transmitter, he could cut off the Nexus's control. He didn't know how, but he knew it had to be done. The man on the ground sneered. You think that little thing is going to stop us? It's a dead end. You're playing with fire. Jackson ignored him, focusing on the device in his hand. He had no time for games. He had to move fast. He had to destroy it before it was too late. Without another word, Jackson sprinted out of the bunker, Max right behind him, both of them heading toward the next target, the heart of the Nexus's operation. The wind whipped through the trees as Jackson ran, the sound of Max's paws echoing in the quiet forest. The map in his hand was now a lifeline, the transmitter a weapon. He couldn't waste any more time. The world was on the brink of disaster, and Jackson was the only one who could stop it. The road ahead would be dangerous, and there were sure to be more obstacles, but for the first time in weeks, Jackson felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't alone in this. He had Max, and he had the drive to finish what he had started. No matter what the Nexus had planned, Jackson wasn't going to let them win. He had uncovered their secrets, and now it was time to destroy everything they had built. He wasn't going to stop until it was over, until the world was free of the shadow they had cast. In this gripping adventure, follow the journey of a determined man uncovering dark secrets tied to a shadowy organization. As he unravels the mysteries surrounding hidden bunkers, the stakes rise higher with every step. From the heart of dangerous conspiracies to the chilling reality of a global control system, this is a tale filled with suspense and action. The protagonist, a war-hardened survivor, must face overwhelming odds and fight against a powerful force that has secretly manipulated world events for decades. As the tension builds, unexpected allies emerge, and every move the veteran makes brings him closer to uncovering the truth. With an explosive conclusion, this story dives deep into themes of courage, survival, and the untold veteran stories that have shaped history. Whether it's a thrilling chase through the wilderness or a standoff in a forgotten bunker, each chapter uncovers the price of fighting for what's right. Explore the hidden world of power, secrets, and betrayal as the protagonist fights to stop a global catastrophe. This compelling narrative gives you a fresh perspective on veteran stories and how one person can change the world. If you are captivated by stories that blend mystery, action, and real-world stakes, you'll be drawn to the unrelenting pursuit of truth in this veteran story. Join the adventure today as the fight for survival intertwines with one of the most intense veteran stories ever told.